Welcome to Cavs Insider here on cleveland.com. I'm your host, Chris Fedors. Cavs finishing up the All-Star break. They're getting back in action tonight against the Washington Wizards in the nation's capital. They went 33-22 in the first half, fifth place in the Eastern Conference. And joining me today on a special edition of Cavs Insider from waitingfornextyear.com, Scott Sargent. Glad to have you with us, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
And from Slam Magazine, Brendan Bowers. What's going on?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. Thanks.
All right, guys, we will get into what happened yesterday at the trade deadline. We'll also do a little bit of fact or fiction. Also, for any of you out there, if you have any questions, any comments, go to the comment section at the bottom of the post. You can leave those there. But, Scott, the Cavs finished this first half on a great run. 14 of 16. They dropped the final game against Chicago, but 14 of 16. Now, mixed in that was a pretty favorable schedule for the Cavs. Do you feel like that's the real Cavs team that we saw the last 3 weeks, or do you still feel like they're still finding themselves?
A little bit of both. The schedule obviously helps, but they were not just winning those games. They were dominating those games. Chicago game, maybe notwithstanding, because I don't think anybody wanted to be there, traveling while everyone else is in New York, getting ready for the All-Star game. But I do think that's the real team, and that's the reason, LeBron yesterday said that he thinks this team can compete. They're going to have to bring it, every night. Yep. The schedule coming up is tough, but I do think that this is what fans should expect going forward.
Brendan, LeBron did say yesterday that he feels like a trade was not needed for this team. Their trade deadline was a month ago when Correct. They brought in Timofey Mozgov, J.R. Smith, and Iman Shumpert. Do you feel this team is good enough to win a championship as constructed right now?
I do. I kind of look at this season in two segments. Okay. The first roster or first team, which was then overhauled, as you mentioned, Chris, during that trade a month ago. So the way I look at it is they've had about 15, 20 games with this new roster. They've had the All-Star break to take a deep breath and look at what they got. As of this moment, I would say that the Cavaliers should be in the Eastern Conference Finals. If they were against the Atlanta Hawks, I say the Atlanta Hawks would give them some trouble. Potentially the Bulls could too, but I'm really worried about the Hawks. I'm not worried, but I think the Hawks pose the biggest threat to the Cavs in terms of guarding both Horford and Millsap and then the way they could shoot. So right now that's where I put them amongst their peers, is in the Eastern Conference Finals. Over these next 27 games, I believe they have an opportunity to prove to not only us, but everyone that's watching, that they can win an NBA championship, but I don't think that they've proved that yet, and that's what these last 27 games are, is a playoff preview. And that momentum needs to start now. It needs to build, and it needs to grow right into the playoffs, because as of right now, I don't see them as a championship team, but it's possible.
Right now, Scott, they're number 5 in the Eastern Conference. If they win tonight against Washington, that means they leapfrog the Wizards. They move to number 4. For this team, with LeBron-James, how important is seeding, do you think?
There's really going to be 5 teams that are going to compete. I mean, let's be honest. It's going to be Atlanta, Chicago, Cleveland, Washington, and Toronto in some order. Yep. So you want to avoid. I think you want to avoid being one of the 4th or 5th seeds, because that means you're going to be playing 2 of those top 5 teams. Right. Where if you can jockey to the other side, avoid the Hawks. To your point, Brendan. I think that's pretty integral. And the tiebreakers are going to be huge. I hope the game against the Bulls doesn't come back to haunt them, in the way of those tiebreakers. I know the teams haven't been necessarily stocked with, roster full of healthy players every time they've played. But, you have to hope that one game doesn't come back, because they do play the Bulls, a couple times again between now and the end of the year. This Wizards game is going to be big, though, because it's going to kick off a really tough stretch against Golden State. And then on down the line, they're going to be traveling a lot. They're going to be playing a lot of back-to-backs. I think they play 7 and 10. So it's going to be really important to not only start tonight off on the right foot, but to your point about leapfrogging them for playoff spots.
Brendan, I get the sense that when anybody has any conversation about the Eastern Conference, the conversation starts with Cleveland and Chicago. Not a lot of people are focused on the Atlanta Hawks, even though they have the most wins of any team in the NBA. But Scott brings up Toronto and Washington. Are those 2 teams, do you consider them title contenders as well, or do you think it is a 3-team race between the other teams that most people talk about?
They're good, and I suppose they could get hot, but if you're talking, I think it's a 3-team race in terms of Chicago and Atlanta. One other team you're going to want to avoid now, not to jump into the trade deadline conversation, though, is Miami.
You're right.
Because, I mean, you're telling me that in the playoffs you could roll out a roster of Goran Dragic, Dwayne Wade, as old as he is,
right.
Chris Bosh playing fine, Hassan Whiteside playing well. That's a team you don't want to play. You don't want to play that team. So, there's a couple teams that they want to avoid. Two teams that are potentially threats, to answer your question.
Of course, the thing that could derail Miami, and LeBron-James sent his thoughts and his prayers with Chris Bosh. He is dealing with a health scare right now. He was in a Miami hospital overnight. The early word, now this is not confirmed, but the early word is that he's got a blood clot in his lungs. It could cost him the rest of this season. Again, that's just a report right now, only speculation, but I'm with you, Brendan. I saw what Miami did yesterday at the trade deadline. I was thinking, wow, that's a huge move because Goran Dragic is somebody that is an all-star caliber point guard, and they absolutely needed somebody to run that offense.
Yeah, and Chris, who guards him?
Right.
Kyrie's got to guard Goran Dragic for 7 games. That's difficult. And he can do it, but it's a challenge. So, but Miami's not, the major threat, but, it kind of maybe bring it full circle on the seeding. If over these 27 games they play like they did, like you just described, Scott, before the All-Star break, the seeding's going to take care of itself, and they'll be in the top 3, and they're never going to catch 1. So I think they need to be in the top 4 because the city deserves a home playoff series. And then, probably top 2 or 3 is where they end up.
Brendan brings up Miami, a team that did very well at the trade deadline yesterday. According to a lot of people, Oklahoma City is another team that people bring up. The Cavs were quiet. They didn't make a move, and there are some fans who still feel like, Scott, this team needs another big guy, maybe a backup point guard upgrade for Matthew Dellavedova. When you look forward to this team, are those the 2 areas that may concern you the most, and are there some guys out there that you feel like you may have your eye on?
Yeah, and I would go in that order as well.
Okay.
I would much rather have a backup big than a backup point guard. As much as Matthew Dellavedova's offensive limitations have hampered the team for a couple games here and there, the Philadelphia game continues to jump out to me with regarding him. But I don't want to see James Jones playing 30 minutes at the power forward spot. And if this team needs to add a backup big in some form, I do think that not making a trade is fine because it sounds like there's going to be a lot of bodies either bought out or just available in some form that they can add. I know Kendrick Perkins is a name people are throwing out there. JaVale McGee is a name people are throwing out there. So there are going to be options, and it just comes down to, one, finding someone who wants to come to Cleveland, which you would think wouldn't be too hard. Clippers, I think, are in the running for Perk, but I would add a backup big and then, just roll the dice with Dellavedova if you have to.
Scott, how would you feel about Perk on this team?
I'd love him. I don't want he doesn't need the ball, which is great. He can offer you 6 fouls, 10, 15 minutes as needed, and you only need to play him if you have an injury or if Timothy Mozgov gets into foul trouble. The Cavs have had the ability to go small and put Tristan at the 5 if they need to for spurts. I think against Houston, they actually ran Sean Marion at the 5 for a couple minutes. So they have the flexibility there, but I would much rather feel a lot better if I had a big body. I hate to use the rim protector term because it's been used so much this year. But that's what Perk brings, and he's a tough guy. He'll stand up for your stars, and I think the only thing standing between Cleveland and him coming here is his relationship with Doc Rivers.
Brendan, second half playoff push starts tonight against the Wizards. Cavs have 27 games left in the regular season. This is new territory for some of the guys, including Kevin Love. You got Kyrie-Irving, you got Tristan Thompson. When it comes to Kevin Love in particular, Brendan, how do you feel he feels about his role on this team?
I think he needs a little help. If you go back to the fundamentals of basketball, the guard brings the ball up the floor and gets it to the forward. I know it's the NBA and David Blatt's running this, offense that's new and innovative, but that's the gist of it. Your point guard gets the ball to the big. And, Kyrie-Irving is a scoring point guard. Ricky Rubio was a pass-first point guard. So there's a natural adjustment for Kevin Love. Is my point guard going to pass me the ball or shoot? And Kyrie's not wrong to shoot because he's one of the best scorers in the NBA. He needs to. But him and LeBron need to help Kevin Love get the ball in positions to be successful, and then Kevin Love needs to be, a little bit more aggressive and say, "Give me the ball. I'm one of the top 10 players in the league, in the world." He could still be top 15. You could still make that argument. So, Kevin Love needs to be a little more demonstrative, and the playmakers need to know, let's help this guy get the ball.
Fact or fiction coming up here on Cavs Insider on cleveland.com. Chris Fedors, Scott Sargent from waitingfornextyear.com, and Brendan Bowers from Slam Magazine. But guys, we've got a question here in the comment section just about the overall minutes. LeBron-James has played a lot of minutes per game. Kyrie, top 5 in minutes per game. Kevin Love playing a lot of minutes as well. Is that a concern for you in the second half of this season, Scott? And do you think that it's important for David Blatt to rest some of these guys on certain nights?
I am, and I do. I do think, to go back to the 7 games and 10 nights thing, I think you're going to have a couple back-to-backs between now and April 15th where LeBron has to sit. Okay. It's not great for the fans. They're paying a pretty penny to sit in those seats. Maybe he does it on the road. I don't know. But there's going to be a lot of traveling involved over the next couple weeks, and I think it'll be pretty important to rest LeBron. LeBron's not going to want to sit. David Blatt may not want to sit him, but I think for the betterment of the organization, from a long-term perspective, I think LeBron, maybe Kyrie, maybe Kevin, but LeBron mostly needs to take a night off here and there between now and the playoffs.
Brendan, the plan was, when the Cavs traded for J.R. Smith and Iman Shumpert, the plan was J.R. Smith is going to go into that 6-man role, something that he's comfortable in, and Iman Shumpert is going to be the starting 2 guard. Do you think that's still the plan, or has J.R. Smith's fit with the starting lineup changed that when it comes to David Blatt?
I think it might have changed it, Chris. And the way I think that maybe the reason that I think J.R. Smith fits more than a Deion Waiters, I point to the game in Orlando when J.R. Smith went 7 of 12 from the floor, 7 of 11 from 3. Deion Waiters' game has never been take 11 three-pointers. It's never been that. He could shoot the 3, but he's a slash and drive guy, pass creator. That's what he is. So J.R. Smith fits into that role better than Deion Waiters because he can theoretically take all his shot and just let it fly from 3, like he told Chris Haynes yesterday at the Northeast Ohio Media Group, just let it fly, and that creates space. Yeah. If you know J.R. Smith's out there, you got to put a hand up, and now here comes LeBron. Here comes all these other guys, so that's why he fits.
It's so funny when it comes to Deion Waiters because, guys, I flip on the game last night. Oklahoma City's playing against Dallas, right? And the first thing that I see after I was watching the finale of 2.5 Men, Deion Waiters misses a shot, screams and one, and then just yells at the official as he's running back down court.
I mean, only way you can deal with a bad call. I mean, what's he supposed to do? I mean, it was definitely a bad call. He's got to let the ref know, and next time, maybe he gets that call.
Only and one when Deion misses a shot. It's never when he makes the shot, then he's looking for the and one. All right, you guys ready for some fact or fiction?
Do it.
Ray Allen will play with the Cavs this year. Scott, fact or fiction?
I'm going to say fact, unfortunately, because I think...
Unfortunately?
I love Ray Allen. He's the only guy from that Boston team that I would root for. I just don't think he's a fit for this team, and I think they need to use that 15th spot on a backup big or a backup point guard.
Do you have a concern that if he does get brought here, he takes minutes away from J.R. Smith, and all of a sudden J.R. Smith, a guy who's got some attitude issues in the past, maybe those creep up in a way that they haven't since he arrived here?
I'm not worried necessarily about the attitude issues as much as the duplication of skill sets. To Brendan's point earlier, JR's been fantastic. Yeah. He's taking 11 threes, but he's doing it wide open. I think there was a stat that 80-something% of his shots are coming without someone within 5 feet of him, which is unheard of.
Why is he so happy?
So you hate to say anyone can make those. Ray Allen can make those. Shump has shot 40% from 3-point range. So we have that here. I think they need to use that spot, just more efficiently. And as much as I'd like LeBron's friends here, I think it could just be used better. And I think from a winning standpoint, this team would be sustainably better if they had a backup big man.
Go ahead, Brendan, lay it on me. Fact or fiction?
I got to take Ray Allen. If I think he will play for this team, and I understand your point, Scott, and kind of I agree with you in the sense that I don't think he would come here and take anyone's minutes, really. I think he would be like adding a sniper at the end of the bench that could maybe come in and hit a 3. I don't think he's going to play over Smith. I don't think he's going to play over Shumpert. I mean,
Brendan,
he's not even in the league right now.
Why would he come then? Because he could go to Atlanta, he could get fourth quarter minutes. He could probably go to Washington and get fourth quarter minutes.
I'm not sure he wants fourth. I think if he wanted fourth quarter minutes, he'd be on a roster right now. You know what I mean? Like, does he really want to play? He's not on a team. So I think I don't know, and I don't have any sources on this or whatever, but I'm looking at a guy like Ray Allen, maybe the greatest shooter in NBA history. He's not on a team. If he was going to join a team, I'm thinking he thinks he's just going to let it fly from 3, knock a couple threes down, and, be on the roster.
All right, Scott, fact or fiction, the Cavs will get the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference.
Again, unfortunately, but fiction. I think it's there for the having. But I think between the tough schedule and potential for LeBron sitting out a couple games between now and then, it's just going to be a tough road to climb. I think they'll be one of the top 2 teams in the East from a skill set standpoint. But when you talk about seeding, I think they just dug themselves too much of a hole floating around 500 for the first half that it's just going to be almost insurmountable to get there.
Brendan?
I think I'll say fact, but to Scott's point, like, that's what we were talking about in the beginning. These next 27 games, they need to prove to us, to the fans and the NBA community, that they are a 2 or a 3 seed. They haven't done that. I can't sit here and say they've done it, fact.
Right.
But I think it's very possible, but they're going to need to play well.
Scott, fact or fiction, Kevin Love will be playing with the Cleveland Cavaliers next season?
I'm going to say fact.
Okay.
I don't think he's happy, but I don't think his unhappiness is rooted in anything, philosophical or organizationally. I think he's just unhappy because he's a competitive individual who isn't hitting shots at a rate he's been used to. I think he's more unhappy with himself than with anyone else or the situation. And I do think he'll be here next year. Largely because I take his word, but I also think financially it would make more sense for him to sign a 1-year deal and then play for that once the salary cap is bumped up in 2016.
Yeah, I'm fact as well. I mean, if you're on a roster that LeBron-James declares is capable of winning an NBA championship, you don't leave it.
All right, fact or fiction, the Cleveland Cavaliers will win the NBA championship this year. Scott?
I said it during our preseason video, and I'm going to stick with it. I do think they will win an NBA championship this year. It'll be a tough road to climb, but I struggle to see, I know you mentioned Atlanta, Chicago's tough, anyone in the West is tough, but a 7-game series with LeBron James on your roster, if they're healthy, caveat, can win an NBA championship.
I'll just co-sign that. I mean, sure, there's some hope they win an NBA championship here. I'm not going to lie.
Okay.
I'll be an unbiased journalist in that regard. But, I think they can win it right now. If LeBron James is going to come out and say, we can win an NBA championship, he knows what he just did. He knows what his statements do in terms of media and where they go. And he's saying it right now after we've all watched some signs of, maybe he's right. So, I mean, this isn't him saying it during a 6-game losing streak. So, I think it's very possible. It's very possible.
All right, guys, second half of the season starts tonight. The playoff push starts in the nation's capital against the Washington Wizards. Cavs 33-22 on the season. 5th seed in the Eastern Conference. Certainly have some ground to make up in the East. Scott Sargent, waitingfornextyear.com. Thanks so much for joining me. Follow Scott on Twitter at WFNY Scott. Brendan Bowers, Slam Magazine. Also, thank you for joining me. You can follow him on Twitter at BowersCLE, correct?
Yeah, and sorry for being late. It was the weather, though. It's so cold here.
Sure. Blame it on the weather. That's what everybody is doing, Cleveland, right? Isn't that what we're doing nowadays? Just blame everything on the weather.
I'm not going to stop doing that either.
And thanks to all of you for joining us in the comments section for the questions and comments. We'll be back next time here on cleveland.com later.